The planet Kethro 7 was not a friendly world. It was cold, rocky, and full of danger. But the Galactic Council had sent a squad to explore it anyway. There were important minerals here, and someone had to find them. The squad was made of 7 members from different species. Tethan was the leader, a Valkyrin with 4 eyes and gray skin that changed color with his mood. He had 2 other Valkorn scouts with him. There was also the Sari engineer named Yulvex, a small creature with 6 limbs and a brilliant mind for machines and technology. 2 Marathi warriors named Kethos and Bryn stood guard over the group. They were tall, strong, and covered in thick hide that could stop a blade. And finally, there was the human, Marcus Cole. He was the communications specialist, the one who kept them connected to the fleet above. They had set up camp in a valley between 2 tall mountains. It seemed like a safe place. The mountains blocked the wind, and there was water nearby. Their shelter units were modern and strong. Their thermal generator kept them warm. Their supplies would last for 2 weeks. Everything was according to plan. But Kethro 7 did not care about plans. The Iron Tempest came without warning. The planet was known for these storms, but they were not supposed to happen for another 3 planetary cycles. The sensors had said so. The data had confirmed it. But the storm came anyway, screaming down from the sky like an angry god. Marcus was the first to notice something was wrong. He was outside the shelter, checking the communication array, when he felt the air change. It became heavy and electric. His skin tingled. The hair on his arms stood up. He looked at the sky and saw clouds forming faster than anything he had ever seen. They were not normal clouds. They were dark purple and green, swirling and crackling with lightning. He ran back to the shelter and shouted a warning. The others looked at him with confusion at first. Then they looked at their instruments. The readings were going crazy. Temperature dropping. Wind speed rising. Electromagnetic interference increasing every second. Tefaz's gray skin turned pale white. That was fear. Pure fear. He had heard stories about the ion tempests of Kethro 7. Entire settlements had been destroyed by them. Ships had been pulled from the sky. Nothing survived when the tempest truly arrived. They had minutes. Maybe less. The squad tried to secure their equipment. They tried to lock down the shelter units. They tried to send a distress signal to the fleet. But the storm was already upon them. The wind hit first, a wall of force that knocked Marcus off his feet. The temperature dropped so fast that ice formed on his visor instantly. He could hear metal screaming as the shelter units were torn from the ground. Then everything became chaos. Marcus did not know how long the storm lasted. It could have been minutes or hours. He just held onto a rock and refused to let go. The wind tried to pull him away. The cold tried to freeze him solid. The lightning struck the ground around him again and again. But he held on. He thought about his family back on Earth. He thought about the warm sun on his face. He thought about anything except dying. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the storm stopped. Marcus opened his eyes. He was covered in ice and snow. His body was shaking so hard he could barely move. But he was alive. He pulled himself up and looked around at what remained of their camp. It was gone. Almost all of it. The shelter units were scattered across the valley like broken toys. Some had been torn apart completely. Others were half buried in snow and debris. The thermal generator was nowhere to be seen. It had been ripped away by the wind and thrown somewhere into the mountains. Supply crates lay broken and spilled across the frozen ground. Marcus started searching for the others. He found Tethon first, huddled behind a large rock. The Valkorn was alive but barely moving. His 4 eyes blinked slowly, and his skin was almost transparent from shock. Marcus helped him stand, and together they looked for the rest. One by one, they found them. Ulvex, the engineer, had curled into a tight ball and survived inside a small crack in the rock face. The two Marathi warriors had protected each other with their thick bodies, though both were badly bruised and bleeding. The other Velkaran scouts had taken shelter in a cave, but one of them had a broken arm. 7 had entered the storm. 7 had survived. But as they gathered together in the ruined camp, Marcus could see the truth on their faces. Survival was not the same as rescue. Tethan assessed the damage with his 4 eyes, scanning everything. His skin stayed that pale, hopeless white. The thermal generator was gone. Without it, they would freeze to death within hours. Most of their supplies were destroyed or lost. Their communication equipment was broken beyond repair. The fleet above would not know to rescue them for at least 5 more days. That was the standard check-in time, 5 days. In this cold, with no shelter and no heat, they would be dead within 1. The aliens began to react in their own ways. Ulvex the Dasari curled up again, pulling all 6 limbs close to the body. Marcus had seen this before in training videos. It was the Dasari way of accepting death. They would slow their body functions and wait for the end peacefully. The 2 Marathi warriors stood perfectly still, their eyes closed, their mouths moving slowly. They were singing their death songs, ancient words that their people had sung for thousands of years when they knew they were going to die. The Velkoran simply sat down in the snow. They were calculating. How long until the cold killed them? How much suffering there would be? They were a logical species. They accepted what the numbers told them. Marcus watched all of this with growing frustration. He understood that each species had their own way of facing death. He respected their cultures and their beliefs. But something inside him refused to accept it. Something old and stubborn and very, very human. He had been cold before. He had been hungry before. He had faced death before. And every single time he had fought. Not because he was brave. Not because he was special. But because giving up was simply not something he knew how to do. Marcus stood up. His body was still shaking from the cold. His hands were turning blue. Every breath hurt his lungs. But he stood up anyway and looked at the ruined camp with different eyes. Not the eyes of someone counting the hours until death. The eyes of someone looking for solutions. There was debris everywhere. Broken panels. Twisted metal. Torn fabric. Scattered equipment. To the aliens, it was just wreckage. Evidence of their defeat. But to Marcus, it was something else entirely. It was material. It was possibility. It was a chance. He turned to the others and spoke. His voice was rough from the cold, but it was strong. Right, let's get to work. They stared at him. They did not understand. The numbers were clear. The situation was hopeless. Work was meaningless now, but Marcus was already moving, already gathering, already planning. Because he was human, and humans did not wait for death. They made death wait for them. The aliens watched Marcus move through the wreckage, and they did not understand what he was doing. Tethan's 4 eyes followed the human as he picked up broken pieces of metal, torn sheets of thermal fabric, and twisted support beams. To the Velkarn leader, it looked like the human had lost his mind. Perhaps the cold had damaged his brain. Perhaps the stress had broken something inside him. Humans were known to be emotionally fragile compared to other species, but Marcus was not broken. He was thinking. Every piece of debris he picked up, he examined carefully. He tested its strength. He checked its shape. He measured it against other pieces in his mind. He was not gathering wreckage. He was gathering building materials. Ulvex, the Dasari engineer, uncurled slightly from the death position. Something about the human's movements had caught attention. There was purpose in what Marcus was doing. There was method. The engineer's scientific mind could not ignore it, even in the face of certain death. Human, Uvex called out weakly. What are you doing? There is no point. Our shelter systems are destroyed. Without fabrication units, we cannot rebuild them. Without construction matrices, we cannot create new structures. The mathematics of our situation are final. Marcus did not stop moving. He was dragging a large bent panel toward a rock formation at the edge of the valley. I hear you, he said, but I disagree. You cannot disagree with mathematics, Uvex replied. Numbers do not care about your feelings. Marcus dropped the panel and looked at the engineer. His breath came out in white clouds. His face was red from the cold, but his eyes were sharp and alive. You're right. Numbers don't care, but I don't care about the numbers either. So we're even. He went back to work. Tethon watched this exchange with growing confusion. The human was clearly not thinking logically, but there was something in his movements, something in his certainty, that made the Volcaran leader hesitate. He had served with many species over his long career. He had seen courage and cowardice, wisdom and foolishness, but he had never seen anyone simply ignore death like this, as if it was not important, as if it was just another problem to solve. Marcus found a large rock and started using it to hit a bent metal beam. The sound rang out across the silent valley. Bang, bang. Slowly, the beam began to straighten. It was not perfect. It was not precise, but it was becoming useful. What are you making? Tethon finally asked. He could not help himself. Curiosity was stronger than despair. A shelter, Marcus said, not stopping his work. See those rocks over there? They form a natural corner. If I can prop these panels against them at the right angle, we'll have walls. The wind comes from the north, so we need the strongest wall facing that direction. The panels aren't flat anymore, but that's actually good. Curved surfaces are stronger than flat ones. They spread the force around. Tethon blinked all four eyes. You learned this in human engineering schools? Marcus laughed. It was a strange sound in the frozen wasteland. No, I learned this from my grandfather. He built a shed in his backyard using old car parts and wood from broken furniture. Ugliest thing you ever saw. But it stood for 30 years. He hit the beam again. Humans have been building shelters since before we could write, before we could count. We didn't have fabrication units or construction matrices. We just had hands and rocks and the need to not die. He stood up and carried the straightened beam to the rock formation. Then he went back for another piece. Uvex was fully uncurled now, watching with all 6 limbs extended. The engineer's scientific training made it impossible to look away. What the human was doing should not work. There were no calculations, no structural analysis, no material testing. He was just looking at things and deciding where they should go. It was primitive. It was crude. It was fascinating. The load-bearing capacity of those panels is compromised, Uvex said. They have stress fractures from the storm damage. Marcus nodded. I know. That's why I'm using 3 of them layered together. Each one is weak, but together they're strong enough. And I'm angling them so the weight pushes down into the rock instead of against the joints. Ulvex's limbs twitched with surprise. That is actually correct. How did you calculate the force vectors without instruments? I didn't calculate anything, Marcus said. I just looked at it and felt what seemed right. Humans are good at that. We've been doing it for a long time. Something changed in the engineer's eyes. It was the look of a scientist seeing something new, something that did not fit into existing understanding. Uvex stood up on shaking limbs and moved toward the human. Show me what to do, the Visari said. I want to understand. Marcus smiled. It was the first smile anyone had seen since before the storm. Grab that fabric over there. The torn thermal blankets. We're going to weave them together to make insulation for the walls. Ulvex picked up the fabric with 2 of the 6 limbs. Weave? I do not know this technique. I'll teach you. It's not hard. Over, under. Humans have been doing it for about 12,000 years. One by one, the others began to move. Kathos, the Mirathi warrior, stopped singing the death song and walked over to Marcus. The warrior was huge, with muscles built for combat, but there was uncertainty in those fierce eyes. I am not a builder, Kathos said. I am trained for battle. I do not know how to make things. Marcus looked up at the towering alien. Can you hold heavy things? Yes. Can you push things into place? Yes, then you can build. Hold this panel here while I secure the other end. Kathos held the panel. It was strange work for a warrior. There was no enemy to fight, no glory to win. But there was purpose. And purpose was something the Mirathi understood. The shelter grew piece by piece. Marcus directed everyone with simple instructions. Hold this, move that, push here, pull there. He did not use complicated words or technical language. He just pointed and demonstrated and explained in the most basic terms. The aliens found themselves understanding, even though nothing they were doing matched their training or their technology. Tethan brought more materials from the wreckage. The other Velkorn scouts searched for useful pieces despite their injuries. Even Bryn, the second Mirathi warrior, joined in, using powerful arms to bend metal that Marcus could not move alone. After 3 hours of work, it was done. The shelter was ugly. There was no other word for it. The walls were uneven, made of mismatched panels held together with twisted wire and strips of fabric. The roof was a patchwork of thermal blankets stretched over bent beams. The whole structure leaned slightly to one side and creaked in the wind, but it blocked the wind. But it was solid. But it was warm inside compared to the frozen air outside. The squad crawled into the shelter and pressed together for warmth. It was cramped and uncomfortable. The floor was just rock, covered with torn fabric. The ceiling was low enough that the Mirathi had to crouch, but they were out of the wind. They were protected from the elements. They had walls between themselves and death. Ulvex looked around at the structure with awe, 6 limbs pressed against the walls, feeling the construction. This should not work, the engineer said quietly. By every principle I know, this should not work. There are no proper joints, no calculated load distributions, no engineered connections. Marcus leaned back against the wall, exhausted but satisfied. And yet, here we are, dry and blocked from the wind. How? Ulvex asked. How did you know it would hold? Marcus thought about the question. I didn't know for sure. But humans have been building shelters from nothing for hundreds of thousands of years. We built them from sticks and leaves. We built them from bones and animal skins. We built them from snow and ice. We built them from mud and grass. Every human carries that knowledge somewhere deep inside. Not in our minds, in our blood, in our bones. We see a problem and we just start solving it, even when we don't have the right tools or the right materials. Because that's who we are. That's what we do. The shelter creaked again in the wind, but it held. Outside, the temperature dropped further as night approached. Inside, 7 survivors sat together in a structure built from wreckage and human stubbornness. It was a start. But Marcus knew they were not safe yet. Shelter was only part of the problem. Without heat, the cold would still kill them. Just slower. He looked at the others huddled together, their body heat already fading. They had stopped waiting for death. They had started working together. That was good. But he needed to give them more. He needed to give them fire. The fire kept burning through the second day, and the squad kept feeding it with the fibrous plants that Marcus showed them how to gather. They were warm now. They were sheltered. But a new problem was becoming impossible to ignore. They were hungry. The storm had scattered their supply crates across the valley. Most of the ration packs had been destroyed or lost completely. What remained was barely enough for 2 days if they stretched it thin. Rescue was still at least 4 days away, maybe 5. The mathematics were simple and cruel. They would starve before help arrived. Kethos, the Mirathi warrior, was the one who said it out loud. "We must ration," the warrior said, voice heavy with acceptance. "Some will weaken faster than others. We should determine now who will receive priority for food. The strongest should eat first, to preserve the ability to protect the group. This is the way of my people." Bryn, the other Mirathi, nodded in agreement. The warriors should remain strong. The others should accept reduced portions. It is logical. It is survival. Tethan, the Velkorn leader, considered this with his 4 eyes. Perhaps the calculus of survival suggests that maintaining the most useful members of the group increases overall chances. If we must sacrifice some for others to live, this is a decision that must be made. Marcus had been quiet during this discussion. He was sitting near the entrance of the shelter, looking out at the valley with that thinking expression the others had learned to recognize. Now he turned back to face the group. "Nobody's being prioritized," he said firmly. "And nobody's going hungry. We're all eating. All of us, equally." The aliens stared at him. Yulvex, the Thesari engineer, spoke what everyone was thinking. "Human, we appreciate your optimism, but it is not realistic. There's not enough food. We cannot create food from nothing. Even your species cannot do that." Marcus stood up. "You're right. We can't create food from nothing. But we're not surrounded by nothing. We're surrounded by a living planet. There's food everywhere. We just have to find it." He pointed out the entrance of the rocky valley. "I've been watching this place since we arrived. I've seen small creatures moving in the rocks. I've seen plants growing in the cracks. I've seen water flowing from that spring over there. Where there's water and plants and animals, there's food. We just need to know how to get it." Tefan's skin shifted to a confused orange color. "You propose that we hunt? And gather? Like primitive beings? Human, we are not equipped for such activities. We have no hunting tools. We have no knowledge of which organisms are safe to consume. We would be more likely to poison ourselves than to nourish ourselves." "Then I'll teach you," Marcus said simply. "Humans have been hunters and gatherers for millions of years. We only started farming about 12,000 years ago. Before that, every human on Earth survived by finding food in the wild. Every day. For hundreds of thousands of generations. That knowledge is still inside me. I can share it with you." He did not wait for agreement. He walked outside into the cold and started working. The first thing he did was examine the water source. It was a small spring bubbling up from the rocks, flowing into a shallow pool before disappearing underground again. Marcus studied it carefully, looking at the color of the water, smelling it, watching the small organisms that lived in it. "The water needs to be cleaned before we drink it," he called back to the others who were watching from the shelter. "See those tiny creatures swimming in it? Some of them might make us sick, but we can fix that." He found a container from the wreckage, a broken equipment case that could hold liquid. He filled it with water and brought it back to the fire. Then he placed it near the flames to heat. "Boiling kills most of the things that can hurt us," he explained. "It's not perfect, but it's good enough. Humans have been purifying water with fire since the beginning." Next, he turned his attention to the plants. There were several different types growing in the valley, some in the cracks of the rocks, some near the water, some clinging to the cliff faces. Marcus examined each one carefully. "Finding safe plants is tricky," he said as the others gathered around him. Some look safe but are poisonous. Some look dangerous but are nutritious. Humans learned which was which through trial and error. Many of our ancestors died testing new foods. But they passed their knowledge to their children, and the knowledge grew over time. He pointed to a thick, fleshy plant with purple leaves. This one, I'm not sure about. The color is warning me. Bright colors often mean poison. So we won't eat this. He pointed to another plant, green and unremarkable. This one is more promising. It grows near the water, which is a good sign. Water plants are often safe because they don't need poison to protect themselves from being eaten. The leaves are thick and soft, which means they store water and nutrients. Let me test it. He picked a small piece of the plant and rubbed it on the inside of his wrist. If this causes burning or itching, it's probably not safe. We wait and see. After a few minutes, his skin showed no reaction. So he moved to the next step. He placed a tiny piece on his lip and waited. No burning. No numbness. Then he placed a tiny piece on his tongue and waited longer. Still no bad reaction. I think this one is safe, he finally said. But we'll only eat a small amount today and see how our bodies react. If anyone feels sick, we stop immediately. Ulvex was fascinated by this process. You are using yourself as a test subject. This is very inefficient and dangerous. Marcus shrugged. It's how humans figured out what to eat for 100,000 years. We didn't have laboratories or scanning equipment. We just had ourselves and careful observation. It worked well enough for us to survive. But plants alone would not provide enough nutrition. They needed protein. They needed to hunt. Marcus showed them how to make simple traps from the debris scattered across the valley. He used wire twisted into loops and placed them near small holes in the rocks where he had seen creatures moving. He balanced flat stones on delicate triggers that would fall and trap anything underneath. He created paths with small barriers that would guide animals toward the traps. Most hunting is waiting, he explained. You don't chase your food. You let your food come to you. Set the trap right, and nature does the rest. The Marathi warriors watched with intense interest. They were hunters by culture, proud of their strength and skill. But their hunting had always been with weapons, facing prey directly, winning through power and speed. This patient, clever approach was new to them. This is sneaky, Kethos said, but there was respect in the warrior's voice. Your ancestors were weak compared to the beasts they hunted, so they used tricks instead of strength. Marcus nodded. Exactly. Humans are not the biggest or the strongest or the fastest, but we're very, very good at thinking our way around problems. Our ancestors hunted animals 10 times their size, using nothing but sharp sticks and clever plans. That's what made us survive when bigger, stronger species went extinct. By the end of the second day, they had caught 3 small creatures in the traps. They looked something like rodents, with thick fur and large eyes. Marcus examined them carefully, checking for signs of disease or poison. They seemed healthy. He showed the others how to prepare the creatures for cooking. It was not a pleasant process, and some of the aliens looked away. But hunger was stronger than disgust. That night, they ate their first real meal since the storm. Roasted meat from the trapped creatures. Boiled plants from the valley. Clean water heated over the fire. It was not a feast. It was not elegant or refined, but it was food. Real food. Enough to keep them going. Tethon ate slowly, savoring each bite. The taste was strange, nothing like the synthesized rations he was used to. But it was good. Surprisingly good. There was something satisfying about eating food that had been found and prepared by their own hands. I have eaten in the finest restaurants on a dozen worlds, the Velkorin leader said quietly. I have tasted dishes prepared by master chefs using the most advanced culinary technology, but I do not think I have ever enjoyed a meal more than this one." Marcus smiled, chewing on a piece of roasted meat. There's an old human saying, "Hunger is the best seasoning." When you've worked hard for your food, when you've survived to eat it, everything tastes better. Around the fire, the squad ate together. Different species, different bodies, different needs. But all of them nourished by food found on an alien world, using skills that predated civilization. They had 4 more days until rescue. They had shelter, fire, and now food. For the first time since the storm, they did not just believe they could survive. They knew it. The shelter was holding, but the cold was not giving up. It crept through every gap in the walls. It seeped up from the frozen ground. It wrapped around them like a slow, patient killer. The squad huddled together for warmth, but it was not enough. Body heat could only do so much when the temperature outside was dropping toward deadly levels. Teth single quotes. Anand watched his squad with growing worry. The Velkarn scouts were shivering badly, their gray skin turning a dangerous shade of blue. Yulvex the Thesari had curled up again, not in the death position, but close to it. The engineer's species came from a warm world. Cold was especially dangerous for them. Even the Marathi warriors, with their thick hides, were showing signs of distress. And then there was Marcus. The human was shivering too, but he was not sitting still. His eyes were moving around the shelter, looking at everything, thinking about something. "We need heat," Marcus said finally. "The thermal generator is gone. The emergency heating units are broken. But we still need heat." Kathos the Marathi warrior made a rumbling sound that might have been a laugh. "Yes, human. We know this. But knowing a problem does not create a solution. Without technology, there is no heat. This is simple truth." Marcus shook his head. "No, that's not true. Heat existed before technology. My species found it, millions of years ago. Long before we had machines. Long before we had electricity. Long before we had anything except sharp rocks and determination." He stood up and moved toward the entrance of the shelter. The others watched him with confusion and concern. "Where are you going?" Tefem asked. "It is dangerous outside. The night cold is coming." "I know," Marcus said, "but I need to find something. I'll be quick." He pushed through the gap they had left as a door and disappeared into the frozen darkness. The aliens looked at each other. They did not understand what the human was planning, but they had seen him work miracles with the shelter. They decided to wait and see. Marcus returned after what felt like a very long time. He was shaking badly, his lips blue, his fingers barely able to move. But his arms were full. He carried thick bundles of the fibrous plants that grew in the cracks of the rocks. He carried chunks of dark stone that sparkled slightly in the dim light. He carried dried material that had been protected from the storm by overhanging rocks. He dumped everything in the center of the shelter and knelt down beside it. "What is this?" Yulvex asked, uncurling enough to look. "Organic material and mineral samples?" "Human, this is not heating equipment." Marcus was arranging the materials carefully. He put the driest, finest fibers in the center. Around them, he placed slightly larger pieces. Around those, even larger ones. He created a careful structure, a nest of material that looked random but was actually precise. "In the old days," Marcus said, his voice shaking from the cold, "my ancestors lived in caves. They had no electricity, no generators, no technology at all. But they survived ice ages. They survived winters that lasted for months. They survived because they discovered something. Something so important that it changed everything about what humans could become." He picked up 2 of the dark stones and held them close together. They discovered fire. Tethon's 4 eyes went wide. "Combustion? Open combustion inside an enclosed space?" "Human, That is incredibly dangerous. The smoke alone could kill us. The heat could damage the structure. The flame could spread and burn everything. Every civilized species abandoned open fire thousands of years ago. Marcus looked at the Velkaran leader calmly. I know the risks, but I also know how to do this. Humans have been making fire for over 1,000,000 years. It's part of who we are. Trust me. He struck the two stones together. Nothing happened. He struck them again. A small spark flew out but died instantly. He kept striking again and again, his frozen hands barely able to grip the stones. The aliens watched in silence. On the 12th strike, a spark landed on the fine fibers in the center of the nest. It glowed for a moment. Marcus leaned down and blew on it gently. The glow grew brighter. He blew again, feeding it oxygen. The fibers began to smoke. Then, suddenly, a tiny flame appeared. The aliens gasped. Some of them moved back instinctively. They had seen fire before, of course, in controlled environments, in historical recordings, in carefully managed industrial processes. But this was different. This was raw and wild and alive. This was fire made from nothing but rocks and plants and human breath. Marcus fed the flame carefully, adding small pieces of material, then slightly larger ones. The fire grew, crackling and dancing and casting orange light across the walls of the shelter. Heat began to radiate outward, pushing back the deadly cold. For a long moment, no one spoke. They just stared at the fire. The flickering light reflected in their eyes, and something strange happened. Something they had not expected. Ulvex felt it first. A warmth that was not just physical. A comfort that went beyond temperature. The Dazari moved closer to the fire without meaning to, drawn by something ancient and deep. On the home world, millions of years ago, before technology, before cities, before everything, the ancestors of the Dazari had gathered around natural heat sources, volcanic vents, geothermal pools. They had survived because of warmth. That memory was still there, buried in DNA, waiting. The Mirathi warriors felt it too. Kethos and Bryn sat down heavily near the fire, their fierce eyes softening. The Mirathi came from a world of burning deserts. Their ancestors had worshipped the sun as a god. They had danced around flames in ancient rituals. Those traditions had faded with civilization, but the feeling remained. The fire called to something inside them, something older than memory. Even the Velkaran were affected. Tethon settled closer to the warmth, his 4 eyes fixed on the dancing flames. His species was logical and scientific. They prided themselves on moving beyond primitive instincts. But logic could not explain the peace that filled him as he watched the fire burn. Logic could not explain the sense of safety, of belonging, that wrapped around him like a blanket dot. They were different species from different worlds. They had different bodies, different cultures, different histories. But in that moment, gathered around a simple fire in a shelter made of wreckage, they were connected by something universal. Something that every species with ancestors who had survived hard times understood deep in their cells. Fire meant life. Fire meant safety. Fire meant another day. Marcus watched them all with tired satisfaction. He had seen this before, around campfires on Earth, around bonfires at celebrations, around simple flames in the wilderness. Fire brought people together. It always had. It always would. Smoke goes up, he said quietly, pointing to a small gap he had left in the roof. I made a vent there. The air flows in from the sides and carries the smoke out the top. We won't suffocate. And I'm keeping the fire small, just enough to warm us. Not enough to damage the shelter. Ulvex stared at the flames with all 6 limbs wrapped close. How do you know all this? Fire management is a complex science. Airflow, combustion rates, fuel consumption, heat transfer. You are doing all of this without any instruments. Marcus smiled. I went camping with my father when I was young. He taught me how to make fires. His father taught him. And his father taught him. We've been passing this knowledge down for 50,000 generations. Maybe more. Every human who ever lived in cold places learned to make fire. Those who couldn't didn't survive. So now we all carry it with us. It's not science. It's instinct. The fire crackled and popped. Outside, the wind howled. But inside the shelter, warmth spread through the air. Frozen limbs began to thaw. Dangerous cold began to retreat. Life, which had seemed so close to ending, took a stronger hold. Kethos, the Mirathi warrior, spoke in a voice rough with emotion. On my world, we have a saying. The fire remembers what the mind forgets. I never understood it until now. This flame. This simple flame. It connects us to everyone who came before. Every ancestor who survived a cold night. Every generation that refused to die. Marcus nodded. On Earth, we say, keep the home fires burning. It means keeping hope alive. Keeping family together. Keeping going no matter what. The squad sat around the fire as the long night passed. They talked about their worlds, their families, their lives. They shared stories that they had never told anyone. The fire listened to all of it, warming their bodies and their hearts. When the first pale light of dawn crept through the gaps in the shelter, they were still there, still together, still alive. The cold had tried to kill them. The fire had said no. And Marcus was already thinking about the next problem. They had shelter. They had warmth. But their food supplies were almost gone. If they wanted to survive until rescue came, they would need to eat. It was time to teach his alien friends something else humans have been doing for a very, very long time. The rescue shuttle descended through the clouds of Kethros 7 on the 6th day after the storm. Commander Velshoth of the Galactic Fleet stood at the pilot station, her 4 Velkarn eyes scanning the surface for any sign of the missing reconnaissance squad. She did not expect to find much. The Ion Tempest had been massive, one of the worst in recorded history for this planet. Standard survival calculations gave the squad less than 2% chance of making it. She had come to recover bodies. Not survivors thought the shuttle sensors picked up heat signatures in a valley between 2 mountains. Velshoth adjusted the course, bringing the ship lower. As they descended, she saw something that made her stop and stare. There was a structure in the valley. Not a standard shelter unit. Not any kind of technology she recognized. It was rough and uneven, made of broken panels and twisted metal, leaning against a rock formation. Smoke rose from a small hole in its roof, and gathered around the entrance were 7 figures. 7 living, moving figures. That is impossible, Velshoth whispered. The shuttle landed nearby, and the rescue team rushed out with medical supplies and emergency equipment. They stopped when they reached the squad. The survivors were not huddled and dying. They were not weak and desperate. They were standing, talking, even laughing as the shuttle arrived. Tefan stepped forward to greet the commander. His skin was a healthy gray, his 4 eyes bright and alert. Commander Velshoth, thank you for coming. As you can see, we are well. Velshoth looked at him, then at the strange shelter, then at the fire still burning inside, then at the remains of what looked like a meal near the entrance. How? She managed to ask. Your equipment was destroyed. Your supplies were lost. The temperature dropped to lethal levels. By every calculation, you should be dead. Tefan turned and looked at Marcus Cole. The human was helping Yulvex the Thesari walk toward the shuttle. The engineer was still weak but recovering well. Perhaps, Tefan said, we had something your calculations did not account for. The rescue team examined the survivors and found them in surprisingly good condition. Cold exposure had caused some minor damage. Hunger had taken some weight from their bodies. But they were alive. All 7 of them. Every single one. Velshoth insisted on a full report. She gathered the squad in the shuttle and listened as they told their story. The storm, the destruction, the despair, and then the human, standing up when everyone else had given up and starting to work. The shelter made from wreckage. The fire created from stones and plants. The traps that caught food. The water purified over flames. Each step of survival, each solution to an impossible problem, came from the human and his ancient knowledge. When the report was finished, Velshoth sat in silence for a long moment. She looked at Marcus Cole, this unremarkable human communication specialist, and tried to understand what she was seeing. Your file says you have no survival training beyond standard protocols, she said finally. It says you are a communication specialist. There is nothing in your records that explains what you did here. Marcus shrugged. He looked tired but content. I'm just a human. We're all like this, more or less. We've been surviving impossible situations for a very long time. It's kind of what we do. But how did you know? How did you know how to build without blueprints? How to make fire without tools? How to find food without scanners? Marcus thought about the question for a moment. I don't know if I can explain it in a way that makes sense to you. But every human carries the memories of their ancestors. Not in our minds, but in our bodies. In our instincts. In the way we react to problems. For 300,000 years, my species faced challenges that should have killed us. Ice ages, predators bigger than us, famines, plagues, every possible disaster you can imagine. And we survived all of it. We survived because when the world tried to kill us, we just refused to die. We adapted. We learned. We kept going. He looked out the shuttle window at the improvised shelter, already disappearing behind them as the ship rose into the sky. You asked how I knew what to do. The truth is, I didn't know exactly. I just started doing, and the knowledge came. Like it had been waiting inside me all along, passed down from parent to child for 1,000 generations. Every human has that same knowledge. We just don't notice it until we meet it. Kethos the Merethi warrior spoke up. I have served in many battles. I have fought enemies that seemed unbeatable. But I have never seen anything like what this human did. He looked at death and simply said no. As if death needed his permission to take us. As if the universe itself had to ask him before we could die. Yulvex added quietly, I am an engineer. I have spent my life studying technology and science. I thought I understood how the universe worked. But this human taught me that there is knowledge older than science. Wisdom that comes from millions of years of survival. His ancestors did not have our technology, but they survived things that would have destroyed any of our species. And that survival lives on in him. In all of them. Velshoth absorbed all of this, her mind working through the implications. The Galactic Council had always viewed humans as a young species, newcomers to the stars, still catching up to the older civilizations. They had technology now, borrowed and learned from others. But what she was hearing suggested something different. Something the Council had perhaps overlooked. Humans were not advanced because of their technology. Their technology was just the latest expression of something far more fundamental. A survival instinct so deep and so strong that nothing could break it. A refusal to accept defeat that went beyond logic or reason. An ability to adapt and overcome that had been sharpened by millions of years of existential struggle. The story of what happened here will spread, Velshoth said slowly. Every species in the galaxy will hear about it. They will learn what humans truly are. Marcus smiled, a tired but warm expression. We're not special. We're just stubborn. Really, really stubborn. When the universe tells us to die, we don't listen. We never have. The shuttle rose higher, leaving the frozen valley behind. Below them, the improvised shelter stood empty, the fire slowly dying without anyone to feed it. But what that fire had represented would not die. It would spread across the galaxy in stories and reports and legends. The tale of the Tempest-Torn camp. The human who refused to give up. The shelter built from nothing. The fire rekindled from ancient knowledge. The squad nourished by skills older than civilization. In the shuttle, the 7 survivors sat together. They had entered the storm as strangers from different worlds. They emerged as something closer to family. The Valkoran, the Dasari, the Marathi, and the human had faced death together and beaten it together. That created a bond that would last forever. Tethon looked at Marcus with all 4 eyes. I will never forget what you did. I will never forget what you taught us. My entire understanding of humans has changed. Before, I thought you were a young species, still learning your place in the galaxy. Now I see the truth. You are the oldest survivors. The ones who never gave up. The ones who turned every disaster into a lesson and every lesson into strength. Marcus leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. We had a lot of practice, he said simply. Earth is not an easy planet. It tried to kill us every day for millions of years. Volcanoes, earthquakes, ice ages, floods, predators, diseases. And every time we survived. Every time we learned. Every time we passed that knowledge to our children. That's the secret, Tethon. We don't know how to give up. We just keep building, keep adapting, keep surviving. He opened his eyes and looked at the aliens who had become his friends. And we never leave anyone behind. The shuttle continued its journey upward, carrying 7 survivors toward the waiting fleet. Behind them, the planet Kethro 7 continued its endless cycle of storms and silence. It had tried to kill them with its worst weapon. It had failed, because humans don't ask the universe for permission to survive. They survive anyway. And when they find friends who need help, they share everything they know. They share their fire. They share their skills. They share their stubborn, impossible, beautiful refusal to die. That is what humans are. That is what humans have always been. And that is why, across the galaxy and beyond, whenever someone tells the story of the Tempest-Torn camp, they always end with the same words. Never bet against humanity.